Hello, my name is Pavel. I'm from Eurasian Youth Union, and today I'm talking with our guest from the USA, journalist, video blogger, Haz. Hello.
Good to meet
Yeah,
you.
good to meet you too. Maybe if you want, you can introduce yourself better than I introduced you to our audience.
I'm Haz Al-Din. I help run the Infrared Collective, which was founded around 2020 to promote the ideas of Marxism-Leninism in the contemporary age. I regard myself as a minor political theorist, and besides what you just mentioned, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to start our conversation with discussing the multipolarity forum that was at the beginning of this week on the 25th and 26th and 27th of February. And I want to know what was your aim to come here to Moscow and to participate in this forum?
Well, besides always wanting to have visited the city of Moscow, the Multipolarity Forum was very fruitful in terms of being able to meet all sorts of different kind of perspectives around the world who are kind of uniting together around this shared perspective of recognizing the role of Russia in challenging the global hegemony. And you have such a vast diversity of different regions and cultures and peoples. I believe the number of countries represented was over
It's over 130.
over 130, yes. And you can see that all of them can see clearly that despite this, Russia has a privileged and unique role, both historically and in the present era, of challenging the neocolonialism of the West. And there is a very clear atmosphere, I think, surrounding that.
And what participants from what countries did you meet, and did you maybe made some contacts?
Besides, I think the most important person I met was Alexander Dugin. I was very honored to have the privilege of conversing with him. There was also Kemi Seba, who had represented the Pan-African ideology at the event. And I also had the privilege of meeting Sheikh Imran Hussein, who for a long time I've been a fan of and wanted to meet. In general, I was very surprised at the amount of representation from all the different countries at this forum.
And what are your expectations, and what actions do you actually want to undertake when you come back to the USA after this forum? Maybe.
Well, I'm already in the process and the works of launching a new organization, in addition, publishing a new book. And to be honest, visiting Moscow and visiting Russia in general, I suppose, has given me a reinforced perspective about the importance of what I consider my mission in the United States to be, which is to see to the construction and development of an American civilization. I am to an extent envious when I come to Moscow and I see there is actually a civilization here. I mean, just in terms of how people behave, how they act, the sense of public manners and common sense and so on. You don't have this in the United States. You don't have a sense of a unified people or civilization. And to me, the United States is the Wild West. And I think that there will be something historical born from the chaos and the anarchy that's inevitably to come. And maybe at the end of the tunnel, something similar to what we see in Russia can emerge in the not the same as Russia, but a similar sense of polarity and civilization and so on.
And you say that the USA now is the Wild West. So what elements can you see that make it the Wild West? What does it differ from Russia and from other civilization?
I spoke to Dugin, and he said something I think is a very accurate description of the United States, where he said that the American logos is defined by pragmatism, which is the absence of any kind of prescriptive impositions upon how different elements come to interact, how different forces come to produce an effect, right? So effectively, in the United States, as long as things can work in some kind of way, as long as some kind of product of an interaction is consistent, then it's good. Basically, it's not any problem. I think, though, that we also simultaneously have this spontaneous sense of association in the United States. We don't have a prefixed sense of norms and culture and rules. Rather, we have a kind of chaotic and constantly in flux way in which different people, you see this in gang culture, formation of gangs among minorities, for example, and even other kinds of phenomena too as well. Different communities form spontaneously in a very tumultuous way, coming and going and so on and so on. And the only real atmosphere of civilization in the background of all that's consistent is just a general kind of war of all eats all. If you're familiar with the book by Jack London, The Call of the Wild, this kind of notion of dog eat dog, every man for himself, can't trust anyone, there's no one going to no one's going to ultimately have your back, it's you against the world. This is very much the kind of reality of the United States, I believe. And I think that's different from Russia. I think in Russia you do have a shared and common sense of, let's call it a metaphysical vision, a kind of sense of teleology, maybe, a sense of purpose, a sense of direction. A minimal sense of social solidarity, I think, exists in this country that doesn't in the United States.
So why does it happen? Because I have never been to the USA, and what we see in the advertisements and some newspapers is that the USA is quite progressive and very multiculturalistic color, as they show it and as they say. So why does it happen that people live in wilderness, many people live in kind of suburbs and all that way? So why does this happen?
Yes, the multiculturalism and the so-called progressivism, you have institutions, you have safe spaces, they call them. It could be universities, it can be kind of artificial communities, it can be corporate workplaces, HR settings. And of course, these are utopias. Everyone is respecting their differences, their pronouns, there's no racism, there's no intolerance, it's all equality, it's all progressive. That's great. That's only a small minority of the population has the privilege of this kind of setting. And these institutions are artificial. They're not based in any kind of sustainable material foundation that could last without the use of coercive state violence to maintain them. It's very paradoxical. It's like the phenomena of gentrification. We have the liberal, progressive liberal, LGBT, sure, but simultaneously, they need the police, they need the armed force of the state to protect these communities from outsiders, from barbarians, from minorities, ironically, in many cases.
Well, and what can be the way out from this way? So what can you suggest as an alternative to this liberal, neo-globalistic, capitalist way that America lives now?
I think the United States is facing a unique historical moment, not only for itself, but for the entire world history of mankind. And if we study history going back, even, for example, to the ancient Mesopotamia, or the ancient Indus, or wherever you like, you see that civilization, what we call the common reality of civilization, of a state, a tradition of empire, and so on, this didn't always exist. And when we probe and look upon its origins, we see that it was a very kind of chaotic process out of which it would eventually emerge. And seemingly chaotic, irrational confluence of forces inadvertently producing what ends up being actually a rational, meaningful result. Hegel calls this the cunning of reason. So most countries in the world, most civilizations take this kind of history of the past for granted, right? It's the accumulation of the past and the tradition that they're building off of. They don't have to re-litigate these kinds of matters of the origins of civilization and statehood. The United States is where humanity is going to have to relitigate what is the essence of a state, what is the essence of a civilization. How, when we no longer impose any kind of prescriptive imposition, any kind of assumptions, how organically might that kind of arise from scratch, from zero, from absolutely nothing? And I think this is what the United States is poised to experience, a kind of war of all versus all, a kind of universal state of civil war and chaos and degradation, out of which the story of mankind may be retold in a new way.
Okay, and as for the modern directions, modern communities, maybe what can you propose as an alternative to liberalism?
Yes, as an alternative to liberalism, one of the things unique about infrared compared to other dissident spaces is that we regard the precedent for challenging liberal hegemony to more or less have been successfully, and I'll qualify what I mean by that, accomplished by 20th century communism. There were failures in 20th century communism, but those failures are historical, meaning they draw from a kind of integral history in which, yes, there are achievements, there are kinds of successes that cannot be reversed, cannot be liquidated. And if we find ourselves in a moment in which we fail, for example, maybe an example of this, of course, is the Soviet Union, especially with Khrushchev and from there, the Gorbachev and so on, that simply cannot negate the reality of what Stalinism was able to achieve. I mean, I'm in Moscow now and I see the Moscow metro and I kind of have a limited sense of an appreciation for how that foundation of an alternative industrial modernity built under Stalin is somewhat still taken for granted, even now. And so I think it's also true with regard to China. It's also true with regard to the whole history of the communism. I think that the failures of communism can only be regarded as failures from a perspective according to which they could be corrected, they could be learned from. And to me, fascism was never an alternative to liberalism. It was just a kind of tool similar to the neo-Nazis in Ukraine being used today to kind of destroy, for instance, the Soviet Union, which was the real. So I have kind of maybe a more binary perspective of what the real challenge to liberalism amounts to historically, which is basically communism.
And do you think that communism, in some way or another, can be manifested in the USA?
Yes, absolutely. I think Molotov, in his memoirs, said something along the lines of, and this was the view shared by almost all Marxists, that actually United States is the most poised for communism rather than Russia and so on. I don't agree with that perspective, actually, because it was coming from the Eurocentric perspective on communism. But nonetheless, if we understand communism in terms of this kind of complete socialization of the productive forces, the kind of absence of any fetters to the productive forces, any kind of prejudices inherited from the past, and the ability to form communities from scratch. I think the United States I think one of the reasons America has been historically the preeminent anti-communist state is because of such a profound tension between Americanism and communism. Because they're so similar, they have such an acute antagonism with regard to each other. In many ways, it's my opinion that for China and Russia, they were able to appropriate American industrial modernity and adapt it to their civilizations, which is why there was this kind of Cold War in a way. It was kind of maybe a civil war within American modernity. Now Russia and China are moving on from this American modernity to pursue their own destiny, to pursue their own civilizational development. But as far as the 20th century concerned, I think it's fair to say it was a kind of American Civil War.
Okay, and you are known as an ideologist of MAGA Communism, if I pronounce it correct.
Yes.
What is it? Can you just describe it in some way?
MAGA Communism is both a slogan and a meme, what we call a meme. And then people say it's a meme, then it's just a joke, it's not serious. But I take seriously memes. I think that we are beyond the threshold of the privilege of conceptual thinking as the privileged form of accessing and giving expression to reality. I think this kind of vague, unconscious associations being brought together, which maybe don't make sense from the perspective of propositional logic, but make sense on an intuitive level, I think that has become an effective force when it comes to how public consciousness today is shaped. It doesn't have to be correct formally. It just has to be correct in the sense that it feels correct, it makes sense, it's intuitively correct in a sense. And this is what MAGA communism is. MAGA is superficially anti-communist. Everyone knows this. But that's kind of just a pastiche inheritance of some old American traditions, which have no real vitality today. There's no communist movement in the US and so on. There's no context to give meaning to the anti-communism besides that it's an inheritance of the past. So, but when you think more intuitively, it makes sense. You know, MAGA is a blue-collar working class movement rising up against the hegemony. MAGA communism would be aggregating and distilling the essence of the social forces currently at the fore, driving MAGA's confrontation with the hegemony. And communism, this kind of unification of the people around a common interest, specifically the working class, against the ruling class, pulling their forces together, their combined might for the purpose of overseeing the development of the productive forces. I think this is what MAGA is when you think about it on an intuitive level. Trump wants to bring the jobs back. He was on a mandate of reindustrialization of the United States. Now, Trump himself personally, there's a saying that we have as MAGA communists. When you go to McDonald's, you don't go there for the clown, you go there for the burger. So Trump is a kind of clown, and the burger is MAGA, the MAGA movement. And this is how we see it. We don't trust Trump necessarily, but we think that movement, that phenomena, is the first instance of real political distinction since the neoliberal era in the United States.
What I wanted to emphasize is that your ideas of communism, as I understand, go along with American conservative values. And this is actually close to Russian Eurasianism idea, because we also have taken something from left, and we take the right values, the tradition, the conservatism, family traditions and religion, and put it all together as a Eurasianism. What's your attitude to this ideology that was founded by Alexander Dugin?
I've been profoundly influenced by Eurasianism, and it's informed my perspective as far as, you see, the whole issue concerns, to me, there has been I call it the translation error. There are concrete experiences of 20th century communism, Marxism-Leninism. But when translated into the kind of language of the Western logos, specifically into the West, when understood as a dogma, as a theoretical doctrine, something gets lost in translation. And to me, the translation error is the most profound problem of Marxism and of the experience of 20th century communism. On the one thing, something happened. On the other hand, the way in which this is remembered and understood and articulated, according to the theoretical dogma itself, doesn't work. It doesn't properly give a coherent and articulate sense of the history of what it actually was. So the translation error because of the translation error, this is why Heidegger is necessary. This is why, for me, thinkers like Dugin are also necessary for communists to engage with, because they deal precisely with this problem of the translation error, specifically in the matter of the ontological difference or the forgetting of being, defining the history of the West. So I consider that problem to be preeminent within Marxism itself. So to answer the question more succinctly, when it comes to conservatism, communism is about defending the rationality and integrity of history, if you want to put it that way. Meaning the accumulated norms and culture and civilization of humanity cannot just be liquidated in the name of some kind of universal principle or some kind of morality. There's an objective and material reality to these values. And to basically sum up the attitude of communists, whether in America or where elsewhere, what it should be, Stalin himself, there's a debate on whether he was really an atheist or not, but he certainly wasn't a Muslim, right? But when he spoke with the leader of Albania, Enver Hoxha, Hoxha at this time was overseeing a very dramatic anti-religious campaign in his country. And Stalin told him that this was a big mistake, not simply for pragmatic reasons, but because he said, well, for hundreds and hundreds of years, this has been the norm here. The religion has taken hold among the people. You're not just going to undo that. I mean, who are you to do that, you know? He said the religious feelings of the people should not be offended. And there's a very specific reason why this is the communist attitude. Because communism believes that the capitalist mode of production is giving way to the socialist kind, into the bright communist future, if you will. But in order for this to be logical, to be coherent, there must be a kind of logic and rationality to history. The accumulation of the past must have a purpose. It must fulfill some kind of meaning within this frame. So if the traditions of the people, what makes sense to them, their norms, their civilization, their values, if that is just completely dismissed in the name of some kind of universal morality, progressivism, and so on, this is a threat to the integrity of history itself, and therefore the notion of the realization of a communist future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.